Hello and welcome to On Air with Lachie, the live episode 2. My name's Lachie Harris and I am joined with my cousin Kieran Needham. Thanks, Kieran, for being on the show.
No problems. Thank you for having me, Loch.
So today's topic is marriage equality, which is definitely a very controversial topic. So, Kieran, could you just give us a brief history of marriage equality?
Yeah, of course, Loch. In Australia, we, to this date, have not had marriage equality per se. The issue of heterosexual and homosexual marriage is obviously hot on the agenda at the moment and has been for quite some time, and as you said, is very controversial. From my point of view, obviously I'm in a gay relationship and have been for five or so years now with my partner who's from the UK. Now, in terms of history of marriage equality, in the United Kingdom, they now have equal marriage rights. Now, terminology-wise, I don't like to call it gay marriage because that isn't the point. At the end of the day, marriage is marriage. And I think historically, obviously, marriage has been seen as a union between a man and a woman for the purposes of procreation. However, I think over time that definition has most certainly changed, and people today can't really use that as their argument for maintaining marriage in terms of heterosexuality. Some of those reasons are because, well, that would be a very hypocritical thing to do because we've got divorce, which was brought in, King Henry VIII's time, for example. Divorce was brought in when he created the Church of England and broke away from the Catholic Church. So, if you're going to, on one hand, say that marriage is a union, it is something to be protected because of its history and promoting longevity of a relationship between a man and a woman, well, many marriages end in divorce today. You've also got the issues of extramarital relationships, which happen in, any situation, whether it's a heterosexual or a homosexual relationship, those can happen. So, while I respect and appreciate the arguments against marriage equality, I think that there are more arguments for it based on some of those reasons.
Yeah, that's definitely right. And there has been a growing support within Australia. And just before I go into that, I just want to list a lot of the countries that have legalised marriage equality. And this is in the Netherlands. So this was in 2001. In 2003, Belgium legalised marriage equality. Canada then did, provincially in 2003, and then nationally in 2005. Massachusetts in 2004, Spain in 2005, South Africa in 2006, Connecticut in 2008, Iowa in 2009, Vermont in 2009, New Hampshire 2009, Norway 2009, Sweden 2009, Mexico 2009, Argentina 2010, the US District of Columbia, which was 2010, Portugal 2010, Iceland 2010, and the New York State in 2011. While I was planning for this show, I came across some really, really, really good information, and it was a 2004 news poll that found that 38% of Australians supported equality, while 44% opposed and 18% were undecided. Then in a Galaxy 2007 poll, it found that 57% of people surveyed supported marriage equality. Kieran, based on the statistics and evidence that I found, how do you feel about the current climate in Australia?
Well, that's a very good question, Locke. I think, as I discussed at the beginning, certainly with my experiences of living in the United Kingdom and marriage equality being something that the House of Commons and the House of Lords, legislated quite unanimously. It was with, a majority. It wasn't a close shave. I think that for me was evidence that it really is not a huge issue that I think it is made out to be. As I said before, I respect people have differing views and opinions on the subject. I have yet to hear a clear and consolidated argument for why we should not go forward with marriage equality in this country. There is a lot of talk and chatter about the detrimental effects that marriage equality would have on different things like the family unit. There's even ridiculous, outlandish things that have been put forward by people at different times. When I hear things, I think to myself, and I say to a lot of people, well, there are no just and fair argument against it. If anything, there are lots of positives, and I would always argue and talk about those sorts of things before I go down the line of arguing against the negatives, because I think, well, what's the point in looking for negatives when there are so many positives? One of the first things I would say is, how would marriage equality impinge on, someone who is against it? How would that affect them personally, their families, their friends? How would that negatively affect them? And that's what I would love to know, because from where I'm sitting, I cannot see in any way, shape or form how that could affect them, if that makes sense.
I think you'd agree as well. Marriage inequality has an adverse impact on someone's health and well-being. Do you definitely agree with that?
Absolutely. It's like with anything in life, in any situation, there are certain things that, put people in a position where they feel like a bit of an outsider, or, they're missing out on something that other people are entitled to just based on the fact of, whatever it might be. So in this case, I certainly feel that there are a lot of limitations. I mean, my relationship, as far as I'm concerned, is a solid, stable relationship, and I know that my partner would agree with that. And in terms of looking at things like equal rights, that the Australian government, for example, looks at gay relationships, straight relationships, any relationship in de facto terms. So whether that be if I wanted to apply for Austudy, currently doing a master's program, then I'm actually not eligible for that because of Chris's income being taken into account. Now, while that's fair enough, there's a bit of hypocrisy involved in that, because on one hand, my relationship is recognised in legal terms in that sense, but in others it's not. So it's sort of like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, as the saying goes. That isn't fair, and it's not just. So what I would say to people against it is, well, if that's your attitude towards marriage equality and you don't believe in it, well then why should you also believe that my relationship should be considered in those legal terms? There's also the issue of, if I were to have a serious car accident and I should end up on life support, there are a lot of legal concerns there in terms of, in a normal marriage, you don't have the issue of having to prove your relationship if there are decisions to be made about life support machines or serious operations and things like that. However, in my case, de facto relationship laws apply, which is fine, but there is a higher onus of responsibility to prove that relationship should a situation like that arise. So what I would say is that, A, while a de facto relationship is fine, there is still not the element of choice to have that option of marriage and eliminate some of the problems that are involved when serious situations like that might arise.
Many people would suggest to same-sex couples the option of civil union. Do you feel that civil union is enough?
I certainly think civil unions would be a step in the right direction. At the moment, those sorts of things are managed at state and territory level in Australia. 2 or 3 years ago, whenever the LNP Campbell-Newman government was elected into power in Queensland, Queensland did have some form of a civil union in place. It was, well, it sort of was and it sort of wasn't, not in the same capacity as it is in other states or even in other countries. But when that party was elected, that was actually watered down even more to the point of it was merely a registration of a relationship, which to me is very much like going to the council and registering your dog or a cat at your address. So to me, that's quite ridiculous and a little bit insulting, frankly. I'm a human being, and I think a civil union would be a step in the right direction, but then I would also say, well, why not just say marriage equality? Or if you're looking at, on the other hand, if people are against marriage equality, well then how about looking at the whole concept of marriage itself and making it a civil union for everybody? At the end of the day, like I said earlier on in this interview, yes, there are a lot of people that look at marriage from a religious perspective and in the traditional sense of a man and a woman being married and the concept of procreation. That's fine and well and good. But, I don't know the statistics to hand, but I think if you were to look into them, you'd probably find that a lot of people these days, A, don't get married in a church, B, may get married in a church but don't attend Mass regularly on a Sunday as they are supposed to, and those sorts of things. So, again, it comes down to a little bit of a hypocrisy issue. You can't say to people, you can't do this because it goes against X, Y, Z, if you're not going to live by those standards yourself. Who is someone to make that judgment and that call? That's the way I see it, Hypocrisy is a big thing in this issue, and that's the way I see it.
Many same-sex couples want to marry, not only for legal security, but to publicly celebrate their counterparts. Kieran, in your relationship, do you want to get married?
That's a very good question. It's certainly something that we have discussed before today, and it's certainly something that we would consider. So, yeah, I think the key thing here is having the option to make that decision. I don't see myself as someone who is sort of arguing for this just for the sake of arguing. I think there's a personal element to this, and I think there's also a wider scale. Even if I was not considering marriage or I was heterosexual, without putting a biased spin on it, I would like to think that I would be arguing for this anyway. For all the reasons I've discussed, I just don't see a plausible argument against it. In fact, there are going to be lots of benefits and pros if we do consider marriage equality. Some of those things being, and Lachie may be able to elaborate on some of these things because I know you've done a lot of research as well. The economic benefits, the money that's spent on weddings and ceremonies, the extra income that would generate for our economy, if you want to look at it from that point of view. The stability and the sense of being with someone and declaring your relationship to your family and your friends that can bring, that, people might see that as something very important. Or it could be more of an even personal thing that you just want to do, maybe with yourselves and very close family and very close friends. I don't know, but everybody's different. But again, I think it comes down to options and having the option to make that decision. Yeah, that's what I would say.
There are huge benefits to the economy if they were allow same-sex couples to marry. We know from QUT studies that 54% of same-sex couples would marry if they could. And if each of these couples spent about the same amount on their marriage ceremony than other